please raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear any testimony you're going to give will be the truth under the penalty of perjury? If you please take a seat, I'm going to ask you to state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter, please.
Would you like me to take my mask
If
off?
you feel comfortable, you can take your mask off.
My name is Shawn Hopkins, ShawnHopkins.
Okay, you'll notice there's a few microphones sitting there. I'm going to ask you to make sure you keep your voice up and that you speak loudly and clearly, because we are, in addition to your voice, we are required to record all court proceedings. You will be required to respond verbally to any question, shake of the head or or not stuff, okay?
Understood.
Okay, thank you. If you can, just scoot up a little bit closer to those mics.
May I proceed? Good afternoon, Mr. Hopkins. If I ask you a question you don't understand, just let me know, or if you'd like me to repeat it, just let me know.
Okay,
Okay, can you tell the court what your occupation is?
I'm a counselor
And where do you work?
at Oxford High School
How long have you worked at Oxford High School?
since 2015.
Can you tell the court what you did prior to that?
I was a youth pastor.
And how long did you serve as a youth pastor?
I was hired in 2009.
And can you tell the court about your education?
I have a master's in counseling through Oakland University. I graduated in 2015. I had an undergrad from Spring Arbor University in 2009, major in youth ministry, minor in psychology.
Okay, so you started at Oxford High School, and your current role right now is counselor.
Correct.
Did you ever serve in any other capacity in Oxford High School?
I was an intern in the 2014-2015 school year. In the 2015-2016 school year, I was the international student counselor before taking over the general caseload.
Okay, when you say a general caseload, what does that include? What are your duties?
I have averaged 400 students. I work with them on transitioning into high school, post-secondary transition, scheduling, social emotional well-being. It's a myriad of different goals.
Okay, when you say scheduling, what does that include?
As far as helping students with their classes that they are in, helping them pick appropriate classes based on their skill set, helping them pick classes that are going to help them in their career after high school.
And is that done every year or twice a
It's done
year?
once per year.
Okay, and you said you had 400 students on your
I
caseload?
have averaged 400 students during the 10th class.
How many students are there at Oxford High School?
There's approximately 1,800 students within the building.
And how many counselors that do what you do?
We have 4 counselors that have a general caseload, 1 counselor that has an early college caseload.
I'm sorry, here's what? I didn't hear what you said.
We have 4 counselors with a general caseload. We have 1 counselor who has students who are in early college.
You said you had an average of 400.
Correct.
Does that allow you to actually meet every student on your caseload?
The one time I generally get to meet every student is during counseling. If all I were to do is meet with students, I would have approximately 2.5 hours per student per year.
In addition, though, to the scheduling aspect, what else are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Quite a few things. We have general meetings that we have to do. We have general check-ins. This year, there's been times we've covered class periods with COVID and
What does that mean, you covered class periods?
where we've actually checked in and given time, like during an advisory lesson or something like that, where we're in front of the classroom of students. We do educational development plans with students where we are in the classroom with a large group. We have presentations that we do for parents. We have professional development that we need to attend.
Okay, what circumstances generally give rise to you getting involved with a student that has nothing to do with scheduling, but might be from a teacher or somebody else?
Generally, it's a concern for a student's social emotional well-being. That there is some concern about a student not being well, or that we have a concern that a student might need some additional support that would be beyond the classroom environment.
And do you have anything to do with discipline?
I do not.
Okay. Can you tell the court what last year looked like for your role as a counselor in the high school?
Last year was difficult. We at Oxford started in person, but we were virtual for about 7 weeks during the school year, and student attendance was sporadic. Anytime a student was either COVID positive or was in close proximity to somebody who was COVID positive, they were quarantined. So it was not a typical school year of what we would have seen previously. It was an adjustment for the staff. It was an adjustment for the students. It was incredibly difficult.
And this year, before November 30th, what did the school year, was it more normal, or was it back to what you consider normal?
I don't really know what normal would look like at this point from that, but I would say that we were in person with more regularity. We only had 2 days we were virtual. They were the 2 days before Thanksgiving. But, student attendance was still low in general. We still had students missing school at a higher rate than the previous 6.
Mr. Hopkins, do you know an individual by the name of Ethan Crumbley?
Yes.
When did you first meet him?
He came on my caseload in the fall of 2020. The only memory I have of meeting him during his freshman year would have been when we did scheduling, and I do not remember that meeting specifically because we did them via Zoom. So I had approximately 3 grades worth of Zoom meetings with students in a 3-week period.
So you meet with all 400 students scheduled every year?
Aside from seniors, yes.
Okay. When was the next time after freshman year that you had any interaction with this student?
The only interaction I had previous to November 29th was I had received an email from a teacher that he seemed sad.
Which teacher was that?
Diane McConnell, his Spanish teacher.
And do you remember approximately what?
It would have been
Month
early
that was.
November. And I had just what I would call a check-in. I waited for him outside the classroom and said, hey, I heard you might be having a rough time. I'm here for you if you need help.
And what did he say?
He just looked at me and said, okay, and did not follow up with him.
When was the next time you had any interaction?
The morning of November 29th.
And can you tell the court what that was?
There was an email sent to our Dean of Students and a Restorative Practices Coordinator that was then forwarded to me from an English teacher stating that the student had been looking at bullets on his phone in class. So
Go ahead.
So the student was called down to the office by a restorative practices coordinator, who then called me to ask me to be in the meeting as social emotional support for the student.
And did you do that?
I did.
And do you know approximately what time that was?
It was approximately 9 in the morning on this Sunday.
Okay. About how long did that meeting take place?
About 5 minutes.
And what was the student's demeanor?
Compliant, calm, understanding. I did not leave the meeting. I was just there in the meeting. But the student understood that it was not school appropriate behavior when that was discussed as the reason.
How do you
for
know
them
that?
calling.
How do you know that he understood that?
He claimed that he understood that that was not school appropriate behavior.
Was he argumentative?
No.
Was he oppositional?
No,
Did you get any other information about that incident?
no other information about that incident.
Did he have any explanation as to why he was doing what he was doing?
He did. He stated that the previous weekend, mom and him went to a gun range and went shooting, that it was a hobby that they participated in, and he was researching regarding that hobby.
Okay. Before you attended that meeting, did you have any knowledge about his prior history with attendance, grades, behavior?
His attendance was good. He had missed 1 day of school during sophomore year. He was on track for graduation, had no behavior incidents reported at school.
Does the school document behavioral incidents?
They do,
How do they do that?
through log entries in our student information system.
Okay, and who has access to that information system?
Administration, counselors, dean, anybody with administrative access to our information system.
And as a result of that meeting, what, if anything, occurred?
Our restorative practices coordinator called home to leave a voicemail.
Were you there when she left the voicemail?
I was.
And that voicemail's already been entered into evidence, I believe it's exhibit 9. And at some point, was he allowed to go back to the class?
He was.
All right, and did that meeting end in a negative way or a positive way?
It was not a negative way. I would say it was more positive, as in the student was understanding of the appropriateness of school behavior based on the response. And there was no necessary follow through after the meeting.
At that time, did you have any knowledge of, was there individual education plan for this student?
I had no knowledge.
Okay, and did you have any knowledge of any issues that were going on at home?
No,
Did you have any reports of him being bullied?
no.
When was the next time you had any interactions with this student?
The morning of November 30th.
And how did that occur?
I had received an email from a co-teacher in that English class stating that he was looking at a video on his phone. The video was of some sort of shooting. It was said in the email that it was not an actual event. When I met with the student, it was described as a video game.
Okay, we'll get there in a moment. About what time was that email?
That email was sent to me at 8:30. I saw it at 8:50.
Okay, and anything else occur after that?
Yes, around the same time, the student had switched classes and was in his math class. That was when there was drawings done on his math assignment.
When was the first time that you were alerted to this math assignment?
Our dean of students came to my office around 9 AM to let me know that he had received a picture. Actually, I've been shown a picture of a math assignment.
And did you see it at that time?
I had not seen the assignment at that time.
Okay, what if anything did you do next?
I went to the classroom to get him out of the classroom to have a meeting.
And when you greeted him, how would you describe his?
I didn't see much of a demeanor at the time. I was sitting in the front row of the classroom. So I just said, hey, we need to talk.
Okay, what did you do after that?
I was standing with him. He stood up and followed me out of the class. I had grabbed the math assignment off the desk.
And you took him back to your office?
Back to my office, where
Okay,
the dean of students was waiting.
all right. And tell the court what happened in that meeting.
We had a conversation regarding initially the email that I received about the video.
So when you're talking about we had a conversation, we're talking about you and Ethan Crumbley.
Correct. So I had a conversation about the video to ask what it was, because the email was not overly descriptive as to what it was. And that's when he told me that it was of a video. I never saw the video, so I had a description of it being a video game for the student and not an actual event for the teacher who had referred.
Okay, so at the time that you brought the student into the room and had a meeting with him, you knew about the email and you had heard about this math assignment
Correct,
and you had it in your hand.
correct.
What was the purpose of bringing him into the office? Was it a violation of a school code? What was your role and why did you meet?
At the time, I did not know whether there was a violation of the school code or not, based on having not observed the drawing at the time. I did have concern about the student because it was a couple of messages in a couple of days, and the purpose of the meeting was to find out what our next steps would be.
When you said you had concern, what was your concern?
My concern was that I wanted to make sure he was okay.
Okay. So what happened after he sat down? What did you tell him he was there
That we had to discuss an email I had received, and also we had to discuss his math.
for? Right? How did that go?
At first, he was very similar to how he had been the previous day, compliant and understanding. With the email, he regarded it as a video game, stated that he had an interest in designing video games after high school. Then I put the math assignment in between the two of us. He sat across from me at my desk, and I said, I would like to go over some of this. He said that it was a video game drawing that he had done in relation to the pictures that were on the assignment.
At that time, there were two versions of that math assignment.
Correct.
Okay. Which version did you have?
I had the hard copy version, which had been back.
Okay. And that's
Is
exhibit,
it had been doctor?
Had.
yeah, I'm gonna show it, Your Honor. That's exhibit 78. Mr. Hopkins, is this what you saw at that time of the meeting?
Yes,
Okay, and you asked him about this exhibit 78,
I did.
and what was his answer?
His answer was initially that it was a drawing of a video game he wanted to design. I then asked him to explain some of the words that had been written on the drawing.
Like what?
One that I could read was "My life is useless." And so I wanted to ask, what does this mean? This does not sound like a video game.
Okay, what did he say?
His demeanor then changed. He became sad.
And when you say he became sad, what does that look like? What do you mean sad?
He started pausing more in his speech. He then described some things that had happened recently in his life.
What were those things?
He talked about how a family dog had died. He talked about that he had lost a grandparent, that COVID had been incredibly difficult for him. Being out of school the previous year had been difficult. Those virtual days. He talked about a friend who had left. It wasn't able to attend school anymore, was moved. And he talked about an argument about grades the previous time with parents.
With what?
With his parents.
Okay. What did you do next?
At that point, I determined that there was enough suicidal ideation based on his sadness and based on some of the words he had written on there that I called.
When did you see the other version of this worksheet, the original, which is exhibit 7?
The original was forwarded to me in an email, and I saw it approximately 20 minutes
Okay, later?
after seeing the original.
Was it before you called parents or after?
I don't remember.
Okay. Let's talk of, you said you were concerned about suicide ideation.
I was.
Okay. Can you tell the board what you consider and what you learned in your field is suicide ideation?
Suicidal ideation are thoughts, patterns, behaviors, feelings associated with suicide. Sadness, depression, negative self-talk, all of those themes that we see associated with suicide.
Is that the same thing as active,
It is not.
actively suicidal? What
It
is the
is not.
difference?
Actively suicidal would contain a plan, a method, a date, action statements, something that he could take action on.
And how do you determine if it's ideation versus being actively suicidal?
Some of it is taking the information that you have in front of you. I also asked Ethan if he was a threat to himself or others.
So is this part of, you did a risk assessment?
Correct.
Okay, what is a risk assessment?
Risk assessment is looking to gain information on how the person in front of you is and what level of either suicide risk or self-harm risk they may display.
How, I know this social emotional duty is part of your job, but how often are you encountering a student that is either has suicidal ideation or actively suicidal?
As it has become much more frequent, especially in the past year. This year on my caseload, I've had 3 students make attempts.
You had what?
I've had 3 students make attempts.
Okay. And did that occur, did you speak with, did Emily, similar assessments with those students, or you found out
It's
after?
been different for each one. One I did have a very similar assessment.
Okay,
Sir, could you do me a favor, move a little bit closer, your voice is kind of trailing at the end, so. I'm listening.
it does trail at the end. All right, how many of these check-ins, like the one you did with this student, are you doing? Is this a frequent thing? Is this abnormal? Is it unusual?
It's becoming more common lately. I would state that it happens minimal, once or twice per month, in just a normal school.
All right, and every one of those meetings, do you end up calling parents?
I do.
And what triggers a call to a parent?
When the student is a minor,
Yes,
when I have concerns about a bedtime. When the student is a minor. When I have concerns that there needs to be follow-up mental health support for a student. When I have concerns that the student may potentially become suicide.
so at some point you said you did call a parent. And
I did.
who did you call?
I called mom.
Why did you call mom?
I always give students the choice of who they would like me to call. The student stated that mom would be easier to get a hold of.
What was his reaction or demeanor about you calling a parent?
He was very muted at that point. Almost, I would describe it as like resigned to the fact that I was going to call home.
Did he object?
No,
Did he ask you not to?
no.
Okay. Did you get a hold of mom?
I left a voicemail with mom.
And did she call you back?
She did eventually, in between the call back, I also called dad. I don't know whether the phone was answered or not. It was empty air. when I
Okay.
called.
You did eventually speak to mom,
I did.
and when you spoke to her, was Ethan in the room?
He was.
Was the phone on speaker, or was it just you talking?
I put the phone on speaker.
Okay, and what did, by the way, do you see her anywhere in the courtroom today?
I haven't. looked.
Could you look, please? Do you see? It's Jennifer Crumbley, correct? Do you see her in the courtroom today?
Correct.
Can you describe what she's wearing?
I can just see her face. She has a gray mask, glasses.
All right, Your Honor,
You might have to step aside a little bit. Can you describe an article of clothing that she's wearing?
That's
Sure.
gray stripes with white stripes and shirt.
Any
the director would like
No
to properly
objection.
identify that. Thank you. What did Jennifer Crumbley say on speakerphone?
She wanted to talk to Ethan and ask what was going on. He gave a response of, I don't know, was kind of his response.
What did you tell mom?
I stated that I was concerned about Ethan based on some of the time I had speaking with him and based on the assignment information I had. I then sent a photo of exhibit, is it 78?
The second version?
The second.
Yes.
The second version too.
Okay, and did mom eventually have exhibit 7?
Yes, that was forwarded in an email.
Okay, and what did you ask mom to do, if anything?
I asked her to please come to the school.
And what did she say?
She stated that she was at work and that she would try and get in touch with the dad.
And then what was your response?
I stated that I had tried calling dad and was unable to get a hold of him.
And what happened next?
We ended the phone call with her attempting to get a hold of dad.
And eventually, did you have another conversation with
I
Jennifer
did.
Crumbley?
I did. She called one more time to state that she was also unable to get a hold of dad. That she would be there, but it would be approximately a half.
So was it your impression that she wanted dad to come because she couldn't come, or that she wanted both of them to come? What did she say?
My impression was that she was hoping that dad would be able to come because she would be able to.
Okay, but eventually she said she was coming.
Correct.
Okay, and who eventually showed up at the school?
Both mom and dad.
How long approximately did that take? Do you know what time that they?
That they arrived.
Yes.
It was, I believe, around 10:30.
Okay, so you, in the meantime, where was Ethan?
He was with me. I didn't want to leave him alone.
Okay, what were you doing?
We had further conversations about some plans for him after high school. Typically, when a student is waiting for parents to arrive, it's a nerve-wracking time for the student. And I don't want them to be focused on that moment if I can help.
Backing up just a little bit about the risk assessment. When did you conduct that with him?
It was prior to calling them.
And what kinds of things did you ask him?
I asked him if he was a threat to himself or others. And his statement back to me was, I can see why this looks bad. I'm not going to do it. I then asked him to describe some of the words and pictures that he had written on the sheets.
And what did he say?
He stated that the pictures were a video game, but when I asked him to go deeper into the words, he continued to display the sadness that we had discussed earlier, of the friends not being able to attend school, dog dying, grandparent dying.
Did you, when he said, I can see how this looks bad, I'm not going to do anything, did you stop there or did you ask him any more questions?
I asked him specific questions about what he had written. I did not ask any further questions about the plan.
And why not?
Because he stated that he was not a threat to himself.
When mom and dad arrived, well, let's back up. How many times approximately a year do you have a situation where you're concerned about a student's mental health and their safety and you call parents in?
12 to 15 per year.
Okay. And can you tell the court what happened when they arrived? Did you go get them or did somebody else?
I went to go get them in the counseling office left.
And who else was in that meeting?
The student was in that meeting, and then I also texted our dean to return for that meeting.
Okay, so who arrived first, the dean or the parents?
The parents.
Okay, and where were you when the parents entered the room? Were you in front of them or behind them?
I was in front of them.
Okay, and what happened when they walked in the room?
It was different than other meetings I've seen.
Why is that?
They weren't friendly or showing care to their student,
To their son?
to their son.
Did they greet him?
No.
Did they touch him?
No.
Did they hug him?
No.
Where did Jennifer Crumbley sit?
I have 3 seats in my office that are not mine. 2 directly across from me and 1 that's more off to the side.
So you're at a desk?
I'm at a desk.
You're behind the desk and there's 2
There would
chairs in
be
front?
2 seats across from me and then 1 that would not be far from where judges sit.
So about how many?
I would say about 7 feet from me
Okay, where did Jennifer Crumbley sit?
in the seat further away,
And where did James Crumbley sit?
next to me.
And what happened next?
I described why I was concerned about Ethan. That he had stated that he was not a threat to himself, that I had concerns about suicidal ideation, and I had concerns about his well-being. I provided a list of resources.
Let's back up for a second. Did Jennifer James ask any questions about what suicide ideation is?
Not to my mind.
Okay, did they ask any questions at all before we talk about any mental health?
Not to my mind.
Okay. Did you ask them for any input or did you ask them any questions?
Not at that point.
Okay, so what happened?
So I provided a list of resources of mental health supports and stated that though Ethan doesn't, though he states he's not a threat, that I am concerned about his well-being and that I am concerned that he needs somebody to talk to for mental health support.
And did you tell either one of them when that should occur?
I said as soon as possible, today if possible.
And what was the response?
But today was not an option because they had to return to work. My response
Just
was.
slow down for a second. Did both of them say that? Did one of them say that?
Mom said that.
Okay, and her exact words were what?
Today is not possible. We have to return to work.
And what did James Crumbley say?
I don't remember anything.
Did he say that he had to return to work?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness stated he doesn't know what James said.
Well, I'll rephrase.
Rephrase.
With regard to not being able to take Ethan that day, did James Crumbley ever say anything or object to what Jennifer Crumbley said?
He did not object to anything that Mom said.
Okay. And so, has that ever happened before?
Objection.
Relevance.
It's relevancy.
The relevancy is, I have to show that defendants were grossly negligent and did not have ordinary care or apply ordinary care. And whether or not this professional who has at least 12 to 13 meetings a year like this and asks parents to take this child, their son, for treatment or take them home, I think it's absolutely reasonable because it's, my standard is an ordinary care.
Overrule, go ahead.
In any of your meetings, when you call parents because you have that kind of concern, have you ever had anybody say no?
I have never had parents arrive to the school and not take their student home.
If you ask, if you tell them they need to?
Correct.
Okay. So what did you do?
I was a little bit taken aback by that. When parents stated that they could not take their student home that day, my statement was, I want him seen within 48 hours. I'll be following.
Okay. Did you ask them to take him home or did you ask them to take him to get?
I asked them to take him to the.
Okay. And what was the response when you said, follow up, you're going to follow up and it needed to happen in 48 hours?
I would describe it as compliant. Okay. I didn't have a reason to believe it wouldn't happen. I didn't feel 100% confident that it would happen.
And what was your primary concern at that moment?
My primary concern was that Ethan would not be alone.
Why didn't you want him to be alone?
Because suicidal ideation, I don't want us to be left alone.
Did the demeanor or lack of conversation or interaction with him by James and Jennifer, did it seem to have any impact on him?
Not different than I had seen previously with the generalized sadness. I would describe that was how we stayed throughout most of the meeting. His demeanor did not shift.
Did, in the entire, how long did the meeting last?
Less than 15 minutes.
In the entire meeting, did Jennifer Crumbley say anything to her son?
I don't remember her saying anything to her son.
Did James Crumbley say anything to his son?
Yes.
What did he say?
He was looking at the math assignment with his son and going over the you have people you can talk to. You have your counselor you can talk to. We talk, you have your journal.
Okay,
I'm sorry, we thought what? I didn't hear the last part.
You have your journal.
You have your journal.
all right. Did you heard anything about a journal before that?
I had not.
Had you seen a journal?
I had not.
Okay. What was the last thing? How did the meeting end?
Abruptly. I was asked by mom, are we done? Because at that point, the student had wanted to return to class. Parents had described that virtual learning was incredibly difficult for their son. And I then asked our dean if there was any disciplinary reason why a student could not return to class.
What was his response?
No.
Okay. And Jennifer Crumbley stated before that conversation or after,
I believe it was after that conversation. Are we done?
are we done? And what did you say?
I guess so.
And was Ethan present for that?
Yes.
Okay, so what did you do?
I then wrote Ethan a pass back to class. And I told him, I just want you to know.
I can't hear you.
I told him, I just want you to know I care.
Why did you say that to him?
Because I care about my students. And I cared about him in that moment particularly because I thought it was a really rough situation to be showing signs of needing help, of needing support. And it felt like he got the opposite when I tried to give him that help and support.
Did he ever cry?
No,
Did, when he got up and we said that to him, did he say goodbye to his parents? Did his parents say goodbye to him?
I don't remember them saying goodbye to him.
Did anybody hug him? Touch him?
No,
Did he say anything back to you when you said, I just want you to know I care about you?
no,
At some point then, did mom and dad leave right after, or did they stay and ask questions when he wasn't there?
there was about a minute of them just gathering things and going, but nothing.
Did you said you gave them something.
I provided a list of resources and mental health resources in the community.
Once he returned to class and once the meeting was over, what did you do, if anything, regarding Ethan after that?
I wanted him to not be alone. So I checked to make sure that he was being marked present for his classes.
How many classes after that?
He returned to his 3rd hour class. He went to his 4th hour class to lunch, finished his 4th hour class.
And how do you check to make sure he's there?
I get alerts for his attendance when teachers submit attendance.
Why did you check?
Because I wanted to make sure he was never alone.
And what was your plan if that horrible event hadn't occurred?
I was going to follow up with him the next morning to make sure that there was follow-up on his mental health support.
Okay. No. Nothing further.
Questions on behalf of Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good afternoon. Prior to coming into court today, did you meet with the prosecution regarding your testimony?
Yes,
Were you instructed on certain things you were not to talk about?
no,
Were you told to avoid any topics?
no,
Were you told any answers that were important for you to give?
no,
I want to go back to November 29th. That was the day before the school shooting. On that day, you said you received notice from an English teacher that Ethan was looking at bullets in class. Is that correct?
I was forwarded an email about that.
And that email was from who?
That email was from Jacqueline PD.
So Jacqueline Kubina told you that Ethan was looking at bullets in class, correct?
The email stated, yes,
And with that, you spoke with Ethan about the bullets?
I was present for the meeting, yes,
Okay, and that meeting included who?
Pam Fine, Ethan, myself,
And Jacqueline Kubina or not Jacqueline Kubina?
no,
What was Pam Fine's role in the meeting?
she led the meeting.
Why is that? What does she do?
Restorative practices.
Explain to me what that means.
She is our anti-bullying coordinator. And she is a district-wide, restorative practices is, helping students resolve conflict and to help them maintain the time in the classroom.
Okay, so you ended up having a meeting with Pam Fine and Ethan regarding him looking up bullets in class.
Yes,
And as a result of that meeting, Ethan seemed to understand looking up bullets was not appropriate for school, correct?
yes,
And you and Pam discussed how a teacher brewing beer might not be appropriate to look up in class, but people can have hobbies outside of school that are not illegal, correct?
correct.
Were you present when Pam Fine left the voicemail for Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes,
And you know from listening to that voicemail being left, there was no request for Jennifer Crumbley to call back to you or Miss Fine.
I have not listened to the voicemail since then.
What, as far as your recollection, can you tell us what you remember about that?
The voicemail,
Yes.
if she left a voicemail wanting to check in on what had happened with Jennifer.
As far as you understood, did the voicemail request a call back from Jennifer Crumbley or not?
I do not know whether it did or not. If it did not, I would not find that unusual
Why is that?
because it was not a discipline issue.
You said that prior to November 29th and 30th, Ethan had good attendance, correct?
Yes,
No behavioral incidents at the school.
none.
He was on track to graduate.
Yes,
You had no reason to believe there was anything wrong, with Ethan prior to your dealings with him on the 29th and 30th, aside from when he was sad when his dog died.
correct.
And the day that he was sad, his dog died, you had a quick conversation with him to just let him know you were there if he needed you.
Correct.
And he didn't seem to take you up on that offer, but that also didn't cause you any concern, correct?
Correct.
You did not communicate with mom and dad, with mom or dad regarding the day Ethan was sad about the dog dying, correct?
Correct.
You did not tell Jennifer or James, I am available to speak to Ethan if he's extra sad about the dog. There was no reason for you to call Jennifer and James about that, correct?
Correct.
And at the end of the discussion about the bullets, you felt that it had a positive ending, is that correct?
I felt that he understood the conversation.
Okay, you felt he understood the conversation and he appreciated that he should not be looking at bullets in school.
He stated that he understood that, yes.
So the next day, you said you got an email that you received at 8:50, it was sent at 8:30. And it was about a teacher complaining Ethan had been looking at a video on a phone of a shooting, correct?
The teacher stated that the video was not an actual event, and that he was watching it on his phone. Yes,
You never saw the video.
I never saw the video.
So you only know what you've heard people tell you about it. You don't know if it was an actual event, if it was a video game, a cartoon, you have no idea,
I
correct?
have what was reported to me, correct.
Did you ask to see the video?
I did not.
And when you got the message, the email about the video, who did that come from?
Allison Karpinski.
Allison Karpinski. So Allison Karpinski is a separate teacher from the teacher the day before when there was the issue with the bullets.
They co-teach the same class.
But they're separate people, correct?
Correct.
So Ms. Karpinski made you aware of the video that you did not see. Was it at that time that you spoke to Ethan? Or was it after you heard there was some drawings on a math paper?
They occurred around the same time.
So close in time, you heard about Ms. Karpinski's complaint that he was looking at a video that involved some kind of a shooting. And you heard from the math teacher that he had drawn some problematic things on a math assignment or a test.
I did not hear from the math teacher. That was reported to our dean.
Okay,
But they were around the same time.
did it come to your attention around the same time?
Within 10 minutes. Yes.
Within 10 minutes. And that claim involved a third teacher. It was not Ms. Karpinski or the teacher from the day before, or co-teacher. Which teacher was it that brought about the math issue?
Becky Morgan.
So at that point, you would agree with me that you knew what Ms. Morgan told you.
I never spoke with Ms. Morgan.
Did you saw the two drawings from the math assignment or test?
Not at that point.
Not at that point, but you were aware there was a drawing that existed. What were you aware of?
In regards to which part, I'm not understanding what you're asking.
Ms. Morgan, the information she had, what were you aware of with regard to math?
I was aware that the student was in the math class and that there was some drawing on the assignment.
Okay, and did you ever get a copy of the drawing?
I grabbed it off his desk.
Okay, so you grabbed it off of his desk, and at that point, you decided to get Ethan out of class so you could meet with him, is that correct?
Yes,
And you took him you took him down to your office, is that correct?
correct.
So at that time, you knew about the drawing on the math paper.
Yes,
You knew that the math teacher had complained that there was a drawing or brought it to someone's attention, correct?
I knew it was brought to someone's attention, yes.
Okay. You knew that Ms. Karpinski had brought it to your attention that Ethan was watching a shooting or a video on his phone, correct? The video you never saw.
Correct.
And you knew that from the day before, there had also been the incident where Ethan was caught looking at bullets in the classroom. All of those things combined together You were obviously concerned about Ethan and wanted to speak with him, correct?
Yes,
So when you took Ethan to, back down or to your office, you testified that you didn't know if there was a discipline issue. Can you explain that?
the items on the surface do not necessitate discipline.
So students are allowed to watch videos of shootings while in class?
I did not know what the content of the video was, and I wanted to make sure that I was with somebody who could get a complete picture of what was going on.
And you never asked to watch that video?
I did not.
And looking up bullets online, students are allowed to use their phones to Google things while they're in class?
Phone policy is class by class.
Okay. Is there ever a class where looking at bullets would be acceptable?
That is why we had the conversation about school appropriate behavior.
So the following day, when the video popped up in the math paper, you still did not know if there was a discipline issue for you to consider?
I do not do discipline, so I was with somebody who could without differentiation. At that time, I did not.
And the person you're talking about is Mr. Ejak, correct?
Yes,
See the dean of students.
yes,
Now, at this point, you said your main concern was to make sure Ethan was okay. Is that correct?
at what time?
At the time that you were aware of these incidents and you brought Ethan down to your office, you were concerned that you wanted to make sure he was okay.
Yes,
Okay, explain, tell me about this, assessment, the suicide assessment. I don't know anything about it. Is that a tool you've been trained to use? Where did it come from? Tell me about how that
I'm not
works.
gonna object, it's a compound question, so if you could just take one at a time.
Sustained rephrase.
Can you tell me how it works?
how the suicide assessment works.
Yes.
It's a series of questions to gain information from the student.
And the series of questions, is it written out on a form?
No,
Where does the series of questions come from?
usually
What kind of training?
a master's in counseling.
Are there specific questions you ask?
Yes,
Is there a protocol that there are specific questions that must be asked?
the question that must be asked is, are you a threat to yourself?
And when you ask the question, are you a threat to yourself or others? You take the answer they give as true?
I am not a mind reader.
So in this case, you took the answer as true.
Yes,
You are aware that teenagers will lie to get out of trouble, correct?
yes,
You're aware that teenagers can lie at any time about anything, correct?
Your Honor, I'm gonna object to the relevance. I'm not understanding where counsel's going. There's no criminal legal theory that would make this relevant. Particularly if I'm not sure, it seems she's making an argument that if her clients are guilty, that Mr. Hopkins might be too, but they weren't similarly situated. And so I don't know how, whether a teenager lies is relevant to this, in this proceeding.
Just the relevancy.
It goes to his state of mind in terms of what happens next in his steps to meet with Jennifer and James. Because he's using the answers that he's given from Ethan to make decisions about what to do next.
I'm gonna allow you to answer the question. Go ahead.
can you repeat the question?
So my question was, you are aware that teenagers can lie?
Yes,
And when you ask them a question like, are you a threat to yourself or anyone else? You have no way to know whether the answer you're getting is actually true, correct?
that is true, correct.
When you reviewed the math paperwork, you saw concerning material on there, such as the thoughts won't stop, the world is dead, my life is useless, correct?
Yes,
And did you ask Ethan about each of those statements?
yes.
What was his explanation about those statements?
That was when he started getting into his reasons for being sick.
Okay, and you believed that he was also working on some kind of, or planning to be a video game designer, is that correct?
He stated that, yes.
And you would agree with me, though, that video game design doesn't explain these sad thoughts and my life is useless, the world is dead, correct?
Yes,
You ended up calling over to mom first to ask that mom or dad come up and meet you at the school, correct?
yes,
And mom, you understand mom works about an hour away from the school.
okay.
Do you know that, or if you don't know that, that's okay.
She stated that she worked in West Bloomington.
Okay, and are you aware that dad was working locally as a DoorDash driver in the Lake Orion vicinity?
I was not aware at that time.
Okay, so mom originally was going to send dad, but in the end, both mom and dad ended up coming to the school, correct?
Yes,
And when mom and dad came into the school, you had a conversation with them about what we see here written on this math work, correct?
yes,
And you talked to them about the video that Ethan was caught watching,
yes,
and you told the parents that you had done an assessment to determine if he was a threat to himself or others, correct?
I told the parent that I believed he was a threat to himself in spite of his state.
You believed he was a threat to himself despite his statement.
Yes,
And you say that Jennifer and James wanted to leave him in school. Isn't it true that you gave them the option to take him home?
absolutely.
I'm sorry, say that
And
again?
I gave them the option.
To stay in school or go home?
I did not provide options. I provided the recommendation that he gets help as soon as possible today. if possible.
Okay. If you thought it was inappropriate for Ethan to stay in school that day, you could have said he has to leave, correct?
I could have stated that, correct.
There are kids who get in trouble for things and get sent home, and they have to leave the school and go home, correct?
When discipline is involved, correct.
There are kids who vomit at school and have a temperature, and when that happens, they have
Objection,
to
Your Honor,
leave
Your
school.
Honor. How is vomiting in school relevant to the gross negligence of Jennifer and James Crumbley?
I'm showing that there's circumstances. and
I'll
certainly
stipulate there's circumstances where he didn't go home from school sick.
where this witness is testifying that he didn't give an option, he didn't have an option in that this child stayed in school. There absolutely had to have been an option because the school wouldn't let you stay if staying wasn't an
I'm gonna
option.
let you answer that one question, then you need to move on.
Okay, so ultimately, you did not take a firm position. Ethan needs to go home from school.
Correct,
You did not go to Mr. Ejak, the dean of schools, and say, Ethan needs to go home from school, you make him go home, correct?
correct.
When you spoke to Jennifer and James, they expressed parental concerns about COVID was rough, it was hard on his schedule. Ethan was a part of this conversation, is that correct?
Yes,
And you also didn't like or wouldn't like the idea of Ethan being alone at home, correct?
correct.
So Ethan was allowed to stay in school
Yes,
and he went back to class.
yes,
And during this meeting that you had in prior to, I should say prior to the meeting, or maybe during, you can let me know which it is. There was a point where Mr. Ejak went to Ethan's classroom to retrieve Ethan's backpack. Is that correct?
yes,
And Mr. Ejak brought Ethan's backpack to Ethan in your office.
yes,
And that backpack was something that Ethan was telling you he wanted because he wanted his chemistry work. Is that correct?
incorrect.
How did Ethan explain why he wanted the bag?
Ethan did not request the backpack.
So was it your idea or Mr. Ejak's idea to go get the backpack?
The backpack was not even a conversation at that point. The backpack was retrieved because classes were changing and we would not leave it in a class for new students.
Okay, so you guys retrieved the backpack, brought it to the office to Ethan, correct?
I did not retrieve the backpack, but it was brought back to the office.
I'm sorry, but what?
It was brought back to the office.
Mr. Ejak retrieved it and brought it to your office.
Yes,
And at no time did you look in Ethan's backpack, correct?
correct.
And at no time did you see Mr. Ejak look in Ethan's backpack.
Correct.
You testified and briefly mentioned a journal, and I missed it in your testimony on direct. Were you aware there was a journal in the bag?
No,
Were you aware that Ethan had a journal?
no.
What was your testimony about the journal? You said something about it on direct that I couldn't hear.
Dad mentioned that a journal is a place where Ethan could write.
Okay, did you ask, when you heard that, Ethan, if he had a journal?
No,
If Ethan uses a journal when he's upset or a place he can write, you would agree with me that looking at the journal would give you more information about whether Ethan was stable and able to stay in school or not.
yes,
And you did not ask if you could see Ethan's journal, correct?
correct.
And you're aware now that the firearm, that the gun was found in, it was in Ethan's bag at the time you were meeting with him. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware of where the gun is.
If the gun was in his bag and you had opened his bag, you would have seen a gun, correct?
I don't know.
Did you make any effort to go through, to find out what Ethan did have in the bag?
No,
You made no effort to see the video that Ethan had been watching?
No.
Did you make any effort to look at what kind of websites he was on with those bullets? You testified that you knew there was an issue with Ethan's friend being out of school. Did you get any information about what that was about? I think you testified you didn't even know how old the other student was, correct?
I did not know the other student.
In terms of collecting information, we can agree there's a lot of information you did not ask about or collect.
In regards to that,
Yes.
there is information I did not know. Correct.
You understand that you are a mandatory reporter, correct?
Correct.
What does that mean?
It means that I am alerting people who are in charge of the student of what needs to happen. And that in the event of abuse or neglect, I'm alerting Child Protective Services.
You are aware that if you have a reasonable suspicion a child is being abused or neglected, you must report it to Child Protective Services within a certain amount of time.
Correct.
In this circumstance, after everything you described about mom and dad, you did not file a 3200 form with Child Protective Services alleging that there was a suspicion mom and dad weren't getting proper medical attention.
I did not.
Failing to get a child proper medical attention, even psychological attention, is grounds for you to file a 3200 form with CPS, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, you did not see any reason to file one and did not file it.
Correct.
And when you talked to the parents, you told the parents you had done your assessment and Ethan was not a threat to himself, or I'm sorry, to other students, correct?
I stated that he was a threat to himself.
And you said it would be fine for him to get into counseling. You wanted it within 48 hours, correct?
I stated I wanted it as soon as possible, today if possible. When today became not an option, I said 48 hours.
And again, we agree, you allowed Ethan to go back to class and your intention was to check up on him in 48 hours to see that he had been put into therapy.
My intention was to check up on him in the morning to make sure that the process was taking place. I misunderstood. Please rephrase what you're saying.
Discipline is not the only reason a child would have to leave school. Ethan did not have to leave school that day, period, correct?
Correct.
You were concerned about the suicidal ideation, and you testified that Ethan would have gone into his, is it 5th hour? After being in your office?
3rd hour.
I'm sorry, 3rd hour and then 4th hour and lunch, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you notify his teachers in the 3rd hour, 4th hour, or anyone in the lunchroom that you believed he might have suicidal ideation?
No.
And you obviously didn't do that because you didn't think there was any reason to have to protect him in any extra way, correct?
No, I would want him to be with me.
Okay, so him being with people was what was important, correct?
Correct.
And that's why him going home alone and having his parents be working would also not have been ideal, correct?
Correct.
You testified a little bit about the parents and how they interacted with you, how they behaved in the office. It's fair to say that Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley were not parents that were frequently in your office. Is that correct?
Correct.
In fact, this was the first time that you ever had interaction with Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley.
Yes.
I imagine there are other students whose parents you may see more frequently. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And on those parents, you may have ideas of what to expect or not expect based on what you know of them, correct?
Based on the other parents' behavior?
I'm saying, you know, you would be able to predict other parents better that you've been around many times.
Correct.
And so when it comes to Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley, these are people you don't know except for your interaction with them on this particular day, correct?
Correct.
And in your assessment with all of your training, with all of your experience, you would not have done anything different than what you did that day. Is that correct?
As far as alerting the parents about their student having suicidal ideation, that is what we would have done.
And that's what you did. Okay. And aside from that, though, there's not any other thing that you think you should have done or would have done differently that day.
I'm confused. Are you just asking in general?
Yeah.
I want that situation to be as different as possible. I acted off the information I had.
You acted off the information you had available, and you acted in a way that was making the best decision with the information you had at the time, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions on behalf of James Crumbley?
One moment, Your Honor. Nothing for Mr. Crumbley, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes. Mr. Hopkins, counsel spent a lot of time before lunch talking to you about what you knew. I want to talk a little bit about all of what you knew and what you didn't know.
Okay.
So I have some questions for you. Did you know that that James Crumbley had recently purchased a weapon for Ethan?
Objection, Your Honor. Those are facts not in evidence, and that's a misstatement of what the testimony was by Ms. Back.
But that's absolutely in evidence. There's, we just had testimony that the gun was purchased. We've already introduced exhibits showing that both Jennifer and Ethan posted about his gun. Jennifer texted him that day or the day before, your gun. So it's a question of fact, but it's absolutely relevant.
I'm going to overrule. Go ahead and answer the question.
Did you know they bought him a gun for an early Christmas present?
No.
Did you know that gun was identical to the drawing of the gun on that worksheet?
No.
Did mom or dad ever tell you that they bought that gun for him recently, just
No.
4 days prior?
No.
Did you know he posted on Instagram about his new gun?
No.
Did you know that he had been experiencing hallucinations in the several months prior to this?
No.
Did mom and dad ever tell you that he had any significant mental health issues?
No.
Did you know that he spent hours and hours by himself at home?
Objection, Your Honor, that has not been proven. The prosecution keeps asking this question. There has not been testimony to show that.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Let's move on, please.
Did you know that the Crumbleys spent 2 to 3 hours a night, 3 to 4 times a week at the stable without their son?
No.
Did you know that I'm gonna go back. When Dad said about the journal, did you know that written in that journal was a lot of really disturbing things?
No.
Did Dad seem to understand that Ethan would write about his feelings in that journal?
That was how I understood.
Okay. Were you aware that Ethan had texted, were you aware that Ethan had texted his mom about seeing demons?
No.
Were you aware that he texted his mom about things flying off shelves?
No.
Were you aware that he had asked several times to see a therapist?
No.
Were you aware that he thought he was having a mental breakdown at some point?
No.
Your
Were you
Honor,
aware that
I'm
he told
sorry.
his parents
I
that?
object to the question about several times to see a therapist. There are not, Ethan has never asked his parents several times to see a therapist. The prosecutor is taking that from text messages between Ethan and somebody else.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
Thank
Right.
you.
First of all, she just talked about what he said to her clients. That's testimony. They haven't testified to that. And second of all, we've already introduced text messages where Ethan is telling his friend several times that he's telling mom and dad he needs help and he's having a mental
Telling his
breakdown.
friend. Correct.
Okay. Were you aware that Ethan had texted his friend that he talked to his mom about getting help and she laughed at him?
Objection. I don't believe that text has come in as evidence.
Well,
There is not, the fact that mom laughed at him about therapy is not a part of the evidence in this case.
There was, during the course of some cross-examination that they come in,
and the redirect of
the exhibit itself didn't, but there was testimony regarding it.
with no objection. No. Were you aware that he told his friend that he talked to his mom about getting help and she left him?
No.
Your Honor, objection. This is, again, going back to what he said to his friend. That's not saying it to his parent and having the parent
And I'll
laugh.
note that for the record, that correction is that was a statement he made to his friend.
I'm trying to make that really clear, Your Honor. Were you aware that he texted his friend that he talked to his dad about having a mental breakdown? And that he texted his friend that his dad said, suck it up?
No,
Were you aware that his mom, Jennifer Crumbley, just the day before, texted Ethan, you have to learn, LOL, you have to learn not to get caught?
no,
Were you aware that he had access to the gun and ammunition?
no,
Objection. Your Honor, the day before, Mr. Hopkins has already testified that the day before, well, there's two objections actually. First, that he had access to the gun. That's the first objection. The second objection is Mr. Hopkins testified differently when he was talking about the meeting on November 29th, because he indicated that Ethan clearly told him on November 29th he had gone to the shooting range with his mother the weekend before, and that he understood that Ethan was shooting guns as a hobby. So that what Ms. McDonald is asking is not an accurate question, and we're also objecting to the accessibility again.
Response to the objection.
I'm not
So
sure.
are you objecting to facts not in evidence as it relates to the accessibility issue?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead and respond to the objection as to facts not in evidence regarding the accessibility issue.
I think the fact that Ethan Crumbley has that gun and had that gun that day, and that it was purchased for him, shows that he had access to the gun.
I'm going to sustain the objection as to that question.
Mr. Hopkins, were you aware that Ethan Crumbley was not on his parents' health insurance?
no,
Were you aware that he hadn't been to the doctor in several years?
Objection.
That is not evidence in this case, and it's not true.
Response.
Were you aware that in
Respond. Are you rephrasing?
I'll rephrase your. Were you aware that despite Ethan telling his friend that he had asked several times for mental health and they thought he was having a nervous breakdown, that there's no evidence in all of the text messages with his mother that he ever went to the doctor?
no,
Okay. Were you aware that Ethan texted his friend that mom thought he was on drugs?
no,
Did Jennifer or James Crumbley ever tell you in that meeting with their son that they had just purchased a gun for her?
no,
Did they ever ask to look in his backpack and see what was in there?
no,
Did they ever let you know that he was having a lot of trouble at home?
no,
Did they ever ask to see that video that counsel asked you about?
no,
Did they ever ask about anything specific about the worksheet?
they did not ask anything specific about the worksheet. Dad looked at the worksheet.
Did they ever ask you what suicide ideation was?
No,
Did they ever seem concerned for the safety of their son?
not in the immediacy, no.
Your Honor, if I may just briefly recross. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Hopkins, the prosecutor just asked me a bunch of questions about the things that you didn't know. Now, is it your understanding that, let me back up. You testified about your education and training as it relates to psychology. Is that accurate?
Counseling,
Counseling, okay. And you worked with teenagers. You were a youth pastor previously?
yes,
Okay. And so you worked with teenagers for a long, since about 2009. Did I do that correctly?
yes,
You have a lot of experience with teenagers. Is that fair?
yeah,
And based on all of your experience with teenagers, based on your counseling, education, and training, at no time in your interactions with Ethan Crumbley did you feel that he was a threat to anyone else other than himself. Is that fair?
correct,
You didn't ask, despite the fact that you knew that Ethan had gone to the shooting range with his mother the weekend before, you didn't ask Ethan or Mr. or Mrs. Crumbley about a handgun, is that fair?
I did not ask them about their gun.
And you didn't ask them if they knew where it was?
I did not.
You didn't ask them if they thought that Ethan would take it?
No.
You didn't ask them anything about it, is that accurate?
About their specific handgun?
Yes,
I did not ask about their gun.
about any gun.
I did not ask them about guns.
And the prosecutor was asking you questions about what you didn't know about text messages between Ethan and his friend. Do you recall those numerous questions?
Yes.
Time did you ask Mr. or Mrs. Crumbley if they were aware of any issues with their son? Is that fair?
I was alerting them to issues about this.
Okay, yes, you alerted them to an issue that you had been made aware of on November 30th. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And you advised them that they should seek counseling for their child,
Yes.
and they agreed.
They agreed, but they did not agree to do it.
They agreed to seek counseling for their child based on your recommendation. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Hopkins, if you meet with a child and you've got concerns about that student, what is the last resort in terms of making sure he's safe? What do you do?
Absolute last resort?
Yes,
911.
okay. And what would a student look like for you to call 911?
It would have to be a medical emergency.
And when you bring parents in, and you've done this in the past, we talked about this earlier, do you just give them information or do they talk about their child?
Your Honor, objection, this so far exceeds the scope of recross.
I disagree, Your Honor. She just got up and asked about what he would do, why he felt that the child there was no concerns, that mom and dad didn't, I think the assumption is, did nothing wrong, that it was Mr. Hopkins that did something wrong. But I have a right to ask him what he did or didn't do because they just crossed again on it.
Let's answer that question and we're tying this up.
I'll rephrase. Who's the best person to find out about a student other than the student?
The parents.
Thank you.
All right, you may step down. Any reason why this witness can't be excused, prosecutor? No, Your Honor. Fine, counsel.